Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our August 2021 session of Conversations in Color. I'm Terry Caldwell Johnson, and I have the proud pleasure of serving as chair of the Directors Council, who brings to you Conversations in Color, opportunities to have thought-provoking, real-down conversations about what's happening not only in our community, but how we utilize this framework to lift up conversations about race, racial equity, and all of the issues that we know are so pertinent and so important to us at this point. Today, we are super proud and excited to have with us Kuma Roberts, who is with Arrowhead Consulting out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Kuma is the consultant who will be leading the work of the DSM for Equity Collective. This is a new initiative that was launched by the Greater Des Moines Partnership in conjunction with Capital Crossroads. And the work of the DSM for Equity Collective will be led by Marta Cordina, Tanner Kraus, and Renee Hardman, who will be serving as tri-chairs for the effort. The tri-chairs, along with the leadership of Capital Crossroads, identified Arrowhead Consulting as our preferred consultant to really help lead this work. And today, we are so excited to have their senior consultant, Kuma Roberts, with us to share just a little bit more about herself personally, to talk a little bit about Arrowhead Consulting, but more importantly, to really help us understand what's ahead for us as a community and how we are going to center our work around equity over the course of the next year. So Kuma, welcome to Conversations in Color.
Terry, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, a little nervous, but excited that I get to use this platform to maybe introduce a little bit of my work to Des Moines. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. For our listening audience, I just want to cue you in that today's conversation is pre-recorded. We will not have the opportunity for questions, but I want you to know that Kuma will be accessible to our community over the course of the next year. She's already engaged in multiple conversations with community leaders and stakeholders, and those processes will continue over the course of the next year as she and Arrowhead Consulting fully engage in this work. So don't think that you're going to miss an opportunity to engage with Kuma, because she will indeed be available to us. So Kuma, let's go ahead and get started with our conversation.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start a little bit by talking about the groundbreaking work that you were able to lead with the Tulsa Chamber, and how DEI now is really embedded not only in the work of the Chamber, but the work of the community, and how that work will then inform what you're doing right here in DSM USA.
Yes. So I tell the story that I did a variety of roles with the Tulsa Regional Chamber. I was there for 11 years. As part of the time there, I did a little stint in investor relations. I did time in communications, but the bulk of that was really spent in education, where I got like a firsthand understanding of equity and how it interplays in our education system. Then I did some workforce development and talent attraction work. And really, again, equity was this thread that sort of was kind of going through that work. And ultimately, one day I woke up and was told that my job now was full-time diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, I was frustrated. I felt, of course, make that the hardest job, the Black woman's job. How is that going to be measured? How are we going to do this work? But realized, if not me, who? Right. And I felt, based on my previous experience within the chamber, I had really a front row seat to understand how best to change the policy, the practice, the work toward addressing equity, and not just simply diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's how I began doing it. That was about 3.5 years ago that I was started in that role. And our chamber had been really focused on diversity since 2011. We'd had an external council called Mosaic. It's very well known, led by a friend and colleague of mine, Denise Reed, for a long time. And so that part I got, that it was kind of this like programmatic learning, knowledge-based thing, but it was really like, okay, that's wonderful, but there has to be more to it. And so that's when I really started digging in on equity. And so that's kind of been my background.
You know, you mentioned something that I think is super important in the context of not only this discussion, but how people of color are challenged to really begin to not only lift up the importance of understanding these issues, but also creating those pathways towards solution. And your comment about if not me, who, and if not now, when,
right,
I think is so critically important. But I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about the notion of your own personal experience. So, you know, when we're Black in this country, we don't have the luxury of pretending that our history doesn't exist.
Right.
Are there memories of your own experience that weigh on you and things that you reflect on that really help to lift up not only your challenge, but your experience and how that informs your work now moving forward?
Yeah, I think, the biggest piece to that for me, like, as I think about a memory, right, was that I came from a fairly poor, maybe not, maybe it was middle class and I didn't realize it, but my father was an African immigrant. My mother was a nurse. I was able to go to the University of Tulsa, a private college. I did that for several years and ended up having to drop out because my father passed away and my mother could no longer afford the sort of exorbitant tuition it was taking. I didn't have a scholarship to go. And so I think as I think about memories that weigh on me, something not finishing my college education is something that weighs on me. And I think I, of all people, despite not having finished my college education, it hasn't hindered me in a way that I know that it hinders Black and brown people across communities across the nation. I speak pretty candidly about the fact that I was groomed from the very beginning in my household to survive white society, right? My mother was like, you're going to speak this way. We had, rules. We had to eat a certain way. She wanted us to understand what the fork was for and the knife and how to use it properly. She was grooming me to navigate white spaces. And I think at the time that was confusing and challenging. I was an Oreo, someone who was not Black enough to really be in the hood, despite living there, to be connected to my people in that way. And then certainly not white enough to fully really immerse myself from poverty and all of that. And so I've lived in limbo for a lot. And so those are the things that come to mind about that weigh on me about the intersection of just, race in particular and what it means and how to navigate and what parents have to do and the talk and all the things we've had to do. Those are the things that I think I bring to the table in order to have conversations on both sides. Right. I feel like a representative of both sides and uniquely positioned to have conversations related to equity and racial equity in particular.
So it's interesting. I had the opportunity to hear you a little earlier last week, and you referenced the fact that you are part of an intergenerational and interracial marriage.
Yes.
And I think there are so many things, not only about your experience, but what happens when you are in both of those spaces that really speaks to this thing that we hear a lot about today called intersectionality.
Yes.
Let's talk about intersectionality as it pertains not only to the equity discussion, but the larger discussions we need to have in our community about how we overcome all of these isms that we know exist.
Yeah, I do an introduction of myself typically that tries to talk about the intersectionality of all the things that I am that make me who I am. My husband is white. He is 33 years older than I am. So he's in his 70s. He's 78. I don't have the luxury of not having conversations related to diversity, equity, and inclusion probably every day of my life, right? We're talking about how to raise our kids, our own experiences as we experience, the world together out in public. What is that like? I'm the career person. I work every day. He's retired and hasn't had to work for many, many years. He's the stay-at-home dad. And so I try to say all of that because I want people to understand that we are made up of a variety of intersectionalities. And so we can be women and have that in common. We can be single mothers and have had that in common, divorcees and had that in common. And so all of that makes up diversity. It's not just simply about that visible nature about, Black, white, or other dimensions. It's important, right? Race extensively, just not exclusively. And so that's what I truly believe. So intersectionality to me is an intro into conversations around equity because everyone more connects us than separates us. That was really the activity that I tried to do today to really demonstrate that we're just so connected in many ways. And when we lean into that connectivity, the work feels easier because it's personal, you're attached to someone. And I think, COVID especially has really put us in a situation where we're isolated from each other. Connection is difficult. We're wearing masks. We don't have that opportunity. And so this work, I think, helps to remove some of that hindered us from connecting with each other on a deeper level.
Yeah, I love that because, we hear so much about intersectionality and not only the intersections of who we are as individuals, but how that plays out in our workplaces, in our social settings, in so many ways that I think really requires us to be not only intentional about how that intersectionality sort of overlays everything, but also how we recognize and honor that intersectionality in a way that really allows our whole selves to show up.
Right. No, I totally agree. We had, a true lesson of intersectionality as you talk about it like that was last year, in Tulsa, we were in the midst of just, a lot, right? The George Floyd murder happened. Then we had, our Juneteenth, which is like a big celebration in Tulsa. And Juneteenth happens in June, which is also Pride Month. So then we've got, so it was just like really, I started I was advocating and we were all marching and having protests all around that time. And I started feeling bad for the LGBTQ plus community because I thought, okay, we're kind of talking about race here, but yet there are needs there for that community and certainly Black men who are a part of that community. And so, starting to have conversations, we started doing, Being While Black. I can't remember the name of it, but we wanted to really lift up the intersectionality of not only just being Black, but then all of the other connectivity related to the LGBTQ plus community that goes along with that in order to lift up, elevate, and honor and have conversations related to that. Because it started to feel like, oh my gosh, there's all these other needs that we need to be discussing. And I didn't want anyone to be left behind.
Yeah, I think it's so important to recognize the collective effect of intersectionality.
Yes.
And the fact that the collection of people we are and the things that we bring to our experiences are critically important to not only understanding sort of where we enter, but how we relate.
Right. And how we show up every day.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree.
So I'm gonna take us to Tulsa, which is your hometown.
Yes,
hometown Tulsa girl, and of course, we across the country heard so much about the Tulsa experience, the Black Wall Street experience, and the fact that Black Wall Street was the center of Black business. It was where Black wealth existed in Tulsa, and in a matter of hours, Black Wall Street was no longer. Burnt to the ground and obliterated. The experiences of people left to be told. So let's talk about the Tulsa legacy and how a city overcomes the pain of their past to create a way forward for the future.
Yeah, it's like such a dear piece of Tulsa history for me. I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma my entire life. I did live in LA for a little bit of time, but I don't think I learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre until I was an adult. So that story that is now 100 years old, it happened in 1921, is one that I came to basically during my time within the chamber and within that time of doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So you talk about a legacy, right? I think we tell the story of the massacre and the burning of the 30 square blocks of attorneys and lawyers and surgeons and business owners that were just devastated in 1921 over the course of 24 hours. The real story is that it was rebuilt just 4 years later. And it regained its presence in the nation as being Black Wall Street yet again. And so I think as we talk about legacy, I think the legacy is that I believe the spirit of Greenwood is everywhere in North Tulsa, which is predominantly Black, right? When you go there, you're almost disappointed because it's this one square block of what's left of Greenwood. So I believe that the legacy is in the spirit of Greenwood. More Black entrepreneurship, more Black excellence on display, walking up and down the streets. And we are getting there. We have now Black Tech Street and a beautiful museum now, a history museum to tell the story. And so there's some incredible things related to that spirit that I think people from Tulsa and certainly Black people from Tulsa have, and it is like our driving force, legacy. We are descendants of powerful, incredible people that were just defying what was being happening in 1921 by living our best life, creating for ourselves an experience that is uniquely Black and proudly Black. And so that legacy lives on proudly in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Uniquely Black, proudly Black.
Yes.
You know, there are so many things about the Tulsa experience that require us to be very thoughtful about how we tell that history.
Yes.
But I think there are also things about the Tulsa experience that allow us to be very hopeful.
Yeah.
About what possibilities exist and what overcoming looks like.
Yeah.
And how we show up as communities to really rebuild and reboost and reboot and reframe and reclaim all of those things that are so important for
Yes.
Black communities to do all across the country on a somewhat regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to tell a story of sunshine and rainbows. There's still incredible disparity in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and North Tulsa being sort of the main sort of poster child for that disparity. And so when you say the word overcome, you know, we've overcome a lot, but we've not overcome inequity in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One of the pastors there who actually has a church on historic Greenwood, Pastor Robert Turner, says, in order to heal, right, we have to stop the trauma. And everyone wants healing. You know, we stood and sang Kumbaya at the 100th commemoration just a few months ago, May 31st. But the trauma is still happening. You can live 10 years longer just across the railroad tracks between North Tulsa and South Tulsa if you're white and living on South Tulsa, right? And so why is that? Why is our education system, every school has a rating that is A, B, C, or D, or F, and we have the most F-rated public schools within the North Tulsa community serving Black and brown children. So I want to be fair in saying that, yes, we've overcome, but Tulsa is still grappling with having hard conversations, Terry, and they still flinch. That was something that I always advised our chamber was you can't flinch on this work. I mean, you have to like lean in, and you can't flinch, because the minute you do, people are checking for your willingness, your commitment, and the community, the skeptical community that is programs rich and systems poor, is watching every move you make. And when you flinch, they know it's not real. They know it's not authentic. And so when you talk about leading the work, it was like telling them to do that it was like that white leadership, our board members, to really lean in and not to flinch at it. It's hard history, but you got to look it square in the face.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that notion about not flinching.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you do, there's a chink in your armor,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. 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 So let's quickly segue to the DSM for Equity Collective and the work that you are tasked with leading here in Des Moines, along with our incredible tri-chairs, Tanner Kraus, Marta Cordina, and Renee Hardman, who are rock stars in their own right, but bring so much passion and commitment to this work, along with the individuals who are members of the collective. I'm super pumped and super excited about what's ahead of us. But let's talk about it. Let's just get down and dirty on what this DSM for Equity Collective is going to do. So, we talked about building this cross-sector platform.
Yeah.
For how, as a community, we show up in the equity space. And as you well know, equity can be framed in the broadest terms, which means that you're trying to be all things to all people.
Yep.
Or equity can be framed through the lens of race, which is where the Des Moines work will start. So let's talk about centering this work around race and how we create the invitation to our community to join us in this work.
Yeah. So I think part of that is again, we talk about intersectionality, more connects us and separates us. Part of the work is starting to frame that vision and starting to have conversations that sort of pull down the walls, right? I am a little bit in awe when I'm sitting in the room with a Tanner Kraus, right? Of, come and go, a CEO, or Marta, or, Miriam at Principal, just these people who have these roles, right? Incredible power, incredible privilege to do some powerful work. And so for that kind of group to be focused on racial equity, it's a powerful signal to me, and I think to a lot of, and should be a powerful signal to the rest of Des Moines, that this work is going to be taken quite seriously. And, equity is important. Broadly, equity is incredibly important. But race, again, extensively, not exclusively, but we have to start with race, because I believe that we have to do the hard stuff first. And the hard stuff is doing the thing that we'll avoid at all costs, whenever possible, is talking about race, its impacts on whole entire communities, the incredible disparity across almost every single system in our communities, education, workforce, talent, recruitment. All of it, right? It all has a piece to play. And so I applaud you. I applaud the tri-chairs for the bravery to be willing to name racial equity as a priority for the community. And I'm excited to help lead the work of what that looks like.
So building off of your 10 years with the Tulsa Chamber, maybe even 11, if I'm not mistaken,
Yep.
You did some pretty amazing sort of early work in this space that I think we hope to emulate here in Des Moines. And we hope to learn from your experience about ways that work is then applied onto the Des Moines landscape. But let's talk a little bit about how you'll lead this work, what the branding of this work looks like, what the takeaways will be, how we're going to sustain it. All of those things that everybody wants to know, because this is not one of those one and done sort of efforts. It's going to take a lot. We're going to have to dig deep, and it's going to require all hands on deck. So just help us understand sort of your approach to the task at hand.
Sure. Well, what's the saying? You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, or something like that. I'm trying to lead the horses to the water, right? And I believe, and we talked about, even shared language is important. What does equity really mean? When I say equity, it should match what your definition of it is, and what the definition of everyone working on the collective and across Des Moines believe it is. And I believe it is an outcome. Equity is an outcome, and ultimately it's an outcome that people can feel in their lives. And so when we've achieved that, Des Moines will hear that people feel that equity, that increased equity in their lives. So as it comes to a brand, the branding of the work, Des Moines for Equity Collective has had the name well before I came aboard in terms of a consultant. So the brand is up to you all. The brand is what you all make it. You'll be talking about it. You'll be addressing your policies and practices, not only just internally and how you operate with each other and what working agreements you agree and the honesty by which you'll deal with each other, right? But that will bleed out into the rest of the community when you all are demonstrating what true equity and collective impact looks like when you're working together. My real task is to create a tool for which you all will measure that difference people can feel in their lives. And to me, that will probably have some elements of economic wealth or wealth generation. That'll talk about education. It'll have a piece of like what that looks like to partner with a school district and create an internship program specifically for African Americans, given that you have a huge financial sector here. And how can more African Americans take on and join that sector in order to make a living wage, right? And be seen in some of these beautiful buildings that you have downtown. I mean, so that's a piece of it. There's a piece in leadership, who is in leadership and sitting in positions of authority across the city. And then equity calls us to consistently and constantly redistribute power. How do we make sure that more power is redistributed in a way that, again, people can feel it in their lives? That's different. That feels different. Oh, that person that looks like me is sitting in that decision-making spot. Wow, that's powerful. That means they're looking out for me. How do we do more of that so the community gets the sense that they're feeling equity take place in their life?
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna follow along that theme a little bit, Kuma. So I heard you in a presentation talk about equity not being political,
right?
Equity not being about an agenda, but
right.
Really equity being aspirational,
yep.
And operational. And when done right, it's
yes.
something that you feel.
Right.
So give me a sense of how I know, or how I will know, that we have achieved what we've set out to do with this DSM for Equity Collective. What am I going to see that's different?
Yeah.
How's that going to show up? How am I going to measure that?
That's a really great question. So for Tulsa, we have what we call the Tulsa Equality Indicators, which might have been one of the things you all even looked at when you were thinking about what that could look like. You know, I had a very small part of it, but was active in the creation of some of those metrics and partnering certainly at the chamber with the work of the city to do that. But it has economic justice, housing, criminal justice, all of these different elements by which the city does like a 0 to 100 scale. And we said, okay, here's where we are as a city. We're at 33 roughly, or 40, given the different areas. And we know that we've achieved increased equity when we are seeing those numbers track upward. Very similarly, I think there's some sort of dashboard or tool or something that I can help you all create that, given Des Moines' demographic positioning, all of the data that we'll need in order to do this, that will be able to tell you all what those metrics are and then exactly how to track that over time so that people begin to feel that equity in their lives. So it's really the tool that I've been tasked to give you all and present to you all a way to measure that equity. So I haven't created it yet. So I really just feel like I want it to be unique to Des Moines. Every city is different. I can say there's like a lot of similar stories I hear here that I hear in Tulsa. So there's that commonality, but I do believe that it's going to be unique. You have partners here that I'm not as familiar with, and how you all work together. You have an equity collective, for God's sake, and a Capital Crossroads. And so I really feel like all the pieces are here, and what that looks like is largely, yes, I'm gonna lead you there, but I think what it looks like is what you all want to change in society, in your community. The One Economy report is something that comes to mind. It's an incredible document of data, and it tells you the story of being Black in Des Moines, right? And so to me, success, when you've addressed equity and it's worked well, is that some of that disparity is gone. It's eliminated. It's gotten better. To me, that would say Black people feel like equity has enhanced and made a difference in their life, and they should be able to experience that and feel that and talk about it. They'll be talking about it. I have more job. We're working more. I'm making more. I see myself in a position. There's a path for me. Systems are being made clear. I know how to navigate. Those are the kinds of conversations and using the equity lens that'll help move this project forward.
So I read in your bio that you talk a lot about changing policy and practices versus changing hearts and minds. So, that seems to be grounded in simplicity and practicality, but at its core, changing policy, practice, hearts and minds can also be really daunting.
Yes, yeah.
So let's talk about drawing the distinction when we talk about systems and policies, hearts and minds, and how all of that comes together to create this magic that we're hoping to create as this work ensues.
Yeah, what's a little bit maybe, I don't want to say controversial about me is that I would say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just the right thing to do, right? Everyone, it's the right thing to do. We do this work, it's the right thing to do. I employ the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion in this work. And when I say the business case, I'm not afraid to say that it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, it's the profitable thing to do. And I think that makes some people feel some kind of way. But again, I'm not trying to change someone's hearts and mind about how they feel about diversity, equity, inclusion. So if saying profitability is what perks your ear up and gets you to change your policy and practice, then I'm all about that. Because people, as we saw after last summer and George Floyd's murder, people want receipts. They're like, show me the receipts that this matters to you. And so the policy and the practice change are the receipts, right? When the community is calling for more equity, calling for more this, more that, if you can say here as a community, here are receipts, here's how it's working, right? Then that's a policy and practice change that people can feel in their lives. I can't measure a heart and a mind, right? I can't, and people, you go into it, this is what I learned in education. You walk into any high school classroom, high school seniors, you say, how many of you are going to college? Terry, every single one of them raises their hand because that's the practice. They know exactly what to say, right? There's an adult in front of the room. They want to hear that I'm going to college, but they're not all going to college, Terry. Some of them are going into the workforce. Some of them are going in the military. Some of them are going to struggle in technical school. I mean, there's just like all of these different sorts. So I feel the same way with diversity and inclusion. People know what to say. Oh, we believe in it. It matters. Really? Great. Then that will be reflected in your policies and practice. Those will be the receipts that I need to know that my work matters. And so that's why I focus on that versus the heart and the mind.
I love that. The practicality of changing policies and practices, while difficult,
yes,
can be measured. Changing hearts and minds is just one of those things.
Right. And there's nothing, I mean, who can argue that when you employ the tactics related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and certainly equity, that you're not retaining more of your workforce? People feel more included. When they feel more included, and they're showing up as themselves authentically each and every day. They're doing the work. They're more creative. Your teams are vibing better. You're getting different perspectives. I mean, there's just like only benefit as a result of that. And so, yes, it's hard, but I believe it's worth it. I believe it's worth it. And you just can't tell me wrong. I believe it's worth it.
I love it. So Kuma, I know that over the course of the last several days, you've had the opportunity to meet with folks throughout the community, and you've had conversations not only about the DSM for Equity Collective, but where Arrowhead will lead this work, how the work will be led. But also, I think you're using this as an opportunity to maybe test the pulse of the community and get much needed feedback and input as you start this journey. So any insights or things that you've heard that either were surprising, not surprising, an aha moment, or something new that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah, no, not surprising, mostly. A lot of the things I kind of anticipated. I know how systems work and status quo works and how people are just kind of like grinding out, trying to meet their own metrics. And it's hard to stop the hamster wheel and infuse this thing called equity and like figure out what that means. So I heard a lot of just systems sort of operating siloed, status quo, a lot of those conversations. I think if there's tea, if you will, I think there's a lot of incredible things in place in Des Moines. I really see a lot of great pieces in place, but there doesn't seem to be this like united shared vision for moving the needle around racial equity. I think you can get your arms around equity as a whole. That feels really nice. It feels safe, but I think people are really afraid of naming racial equity. And along with that naming comes the politicization of it. It's an agenda that we're pushing by talking about it. And what that does for marginalized communities is it feels whitewashed. It feels diluted somehow to sort of pull back on conversations because people are uncomfortable in having them. And so I think none of that surprises me, but I feel like that's kind of a lot of the heart of what's happening within the city of Des Moines, and certainly an area that we'll have to address. I will say that, I'm a chamber person. I came here, with that sort of chamber backing. I've met with only one CEO, and I presented to the CEO roundtable. So my question is, well, was it just an inconvenient time for community leaders or business leaders, or although they've signed the pledge and that's wonderful, how many made time to have the conversation with me? So I'm hoping in future weeks, there's more of that conversation, because I do believe the work of the business community, it has to be helping in this, right? And all of you on the collective and the capitals are sort of represent that, but we will need more from the business leaders to get this work done.
Yeah, I think there's a clarion call to action right there.
Yeah.
In your comment. And
yes.
For those of you who are in our listening audience today, it's time for you to show up.
Right.
And it's time for you to step up and not only put your name on that piece of paper, but it's time for you to walk the walk. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think it's okay for us to call ourselves out every now and again, because that's how we're gonna get the work done.
Right.
It's funny because I'm going to go back to 2017 when we rolled out the state of Black Polk County, the first one economy report, and we talked about Des Moines and it being the tale of two cities.
Yeah.
And you know what? I am one of the biggest cheerleaders for Des Moines. Have been here for 30 plus years. It's been great to me, my family. But I also know that being a cheerleader for our community also requires us to really also sort of put the microscope on what it is we really need to be focused on. And when we think about the extreme disproportionality that exists, especially for individuals of African descent, and with the work that is emerging with the Latinx population, right, that will also begin to lift up likely many of the same challenges and disproportionate impacts across Brown individuals. It's really going to be time for us to have all hands on deck.
Yeah.
You can't escape the reality of what's happening in your own community. And it doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you are taking the opportunity to recognize where you can make change, fundamental change, that's going to create a stronger base, a stronger economy, a stronger community, a stronger region for everybody.
Absolutely. The difference there, you talked about calling ourselves out. There's a thing called calling yourself out, and there's a comment about calling yourself in. And I think Des Moines needs to do some calling in. And what that means is calling out is effective when you want to stop harmful behavior, right? When you want to name something as unacceptable, you call that out, and that's appropriate. There's definitely times and situations of which that's required. But when we're calling people in, we acknowledge that we all make mistakes, and we admit that the action could be harmful, and we give people the tools to change it. And so I think as we talk about, what's most needed in Des Moines, it's like call out is fine, but we've got to get really good at calling ourselves in, calling in our philanthropies, calling in our business leaders, calling in each other in a personal, vulnerable, real way that says this policy and practice isn't going to work anymore for this community if we say equity is primary for our work. And then here's the tool on what we need to do to change it. I think that will be really key for Des Moines to begin to employ that tactic.
Yeah. So this past Sunday at my church, my pastor talked about how we equip ourselves with the full armor needed to meet the challenges and tests ahead.
Yeah.
And he talked about a young boy who was about to jump into the deep end of the swimming pool. And he was a decent swimmer, but his comfort zone was really in the shallow end, not the deep end. And so he gets to the deep end, and he's poised and prepared to jump in. And his prayer was, Lord, give me skills or give me gills. So in other words, the little boy was saying, give me what I need to overcome this situation,
right,
or what I need to endure it.
Right.
And I think when we start thinking about the work of equity, we're about to move into the deep end of the swimming pool here in Des Moines, right?
Yeah.
And we can either sink or swim.
Right.
And when I think about the skills that are needed to help our community acquire what they need, I think that there are a lot of things that you likely are going to help us explore.
Yeah.
That will either equip us with the skills or the tools or whatever we need to be safe in the deep end of the swimming pool, which is this whole notion around racial equity.
Right.
So calling it out, I think, is what we need to do.
Sure.
But we also need to know that we're going to be equipped at some point to figure it out. We're not going into the deep end of the swimming pool by ourselves.
Right.
We're going to give ourselves what we need to sort of navigate.
Right.
So let's talk about what it is that we need to build up in our arsenal or in our toolkit or in our skill set to be able to sort of take this work on in earnest.
Yeah. I wish I had like this real list of all the things. I really thought about this question. Vulnerability is key. And I say vulnerability because you have to have the straight white male leading this work in a big way. It doesn't happen as effectively without them. You have to do it vulnerably. They have to feel comfortable enough to say, I don't know, versus charging ahead in this self-assured way. And then they have to be heard when they say, I don't know, and met with grace, met with patience, in order to pull them along. And I think that vulnerability is what is primary. There's almost a dissection of, you've got to kind of get back down to the base level in order to build it back up. And it takes trust. It takes a lot of relationships, and COVID hasn't helped. I just think we're distanced and isolated from each other. But vulnerability is one of the skills, if you don't get the gills, that I think the community is going to have to demonstrate actively and publicly, right? I give you an example. Our chamber existed in 1921. Our chamber had leadership in 1921 that burned down Greenwood, that were a part of the KKK, that were a part of all of the things that destroyed a community and decimated it, honestly, for the 100 years, to come. And so when our CEO at the time had a press conference and apologized and acknowledged that and said, I wasn't there, but I take responsibility because it was an organization that bears the name of which I lead today. And I see the impact on that community today. And I'm working again. That is powerful. That's vulnerability that I think people are calling for. It's not necessarily the answer that they need. They realize the answer is hard and complicated, but it's the vulnerability to at least acknowledge that it's hard, right? The disparity is hard, and I'm willing to do something about it. I see it. Oftentimes, we're too caught up in being our CEO or our business leader or our person in society and out on the board and all of this to at least acknowledge that the experience is very different for other people. And sometimes just acknowledging it can be, it's like a deep breath, and people go, okay. They at least acknowledge it, and perhaps they're more willing to work together to address it versus it all sort of falling on the shoulders of one or a very small few. Yeah. So I don't know if that's the right answer, but vulnerability, I think, is going to be key.
Yeah. Well, we all know that this work is not going to be easy. It's going to challenge every fiber of our being to not only lean in,
right,
but to lean in a way that allows our vulnerability to take the day, if you will, in a way that helps us recognize and acknowledge.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a lot of that, just acknowledging that people's experiences are so vastly different and that you can have it good in Des Moines and live a good life, but you also have to recognize that there's a lot of people that don't have that same experience. And the hope is that everyone can feel what that's like at the end of this. Everyone can feel like they have a chance at good. They have a choice, right? Not the chance, they have the choice. And the choice is always going to be bettering their family. And a lot of times people don't have that choice even. So we've got to make the choice available to them.
Yeah, that goes to the core of equity.
Yep. That's it. It's that simple, Terry. It's just a matter of that.
Absolutely. So we've got just about 10 minutes left, and I have just a few more questions that I'd like to get through.
Sure.
Because I think that sometimes people wonder how they can show up in these spaces either as an ally or an advocate, a supporter, whatever it may be. Let's talk about ways that people show up in these spaces that allow them to utilize whatever their skills are to advance the cause.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about allyship. What's a good ally? What does it look like? How do you do it?
Allyship is one of those things I really, it's like it's complicated in my mind. And I know enough. My understanding of allyship is this: an ally is not a name you give yourself. An ally is something that you are named as a result of the marginalized community that you serve in order to see a difference in their life. So I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm an ally, I'm an ally, I'm an ally," and it's like, no, honey, you know, who gave you that name, right? And so I think, and I think in saying that, well, you're not an ally yet, because an ally looks like someone who is truly. It's the hard work of putting yourself in the shoe of the marginalized community, right? And fighting at your own peril, your own loss, speaking out, right there. That's an ally. That's truly like sacrificing something in order to see the betterment for a community that they are not a part of. That to me is allyship. And so people got to stop being defensive about allyship, right? If you're not practicing at that level, you're not an ally. You're a supporter, and that's great. And to support, you need to always be open and be a learner. Like, read a book, understand the history of policing on the African American community. Understand, facilities and the evaluation for ADA compliance and how challenging and contentious that can be in communities and urban planning. Understand what it's like to have one gender bathrooms in a world where people don't identify as either anymore. And how does that look? And so to me, that is the thing that people have to do more of, is just be a supporter and be open to learning. We talked a little bit earlier today about suspending certainty. I think we know exactly the way the world works, and we think we know exactly the way people should be experiencing it. But is that the case? And we have to be willing to question that, right? Is what's good for me good for everyone? And so, that's a little bit about that in my mind. So
no more self-proclaimed allies.
Yeah, and I don't say that to make people say, oh God, well, I'm not even going to try anymore. Like, I don't even want to be that. I just truly believe that if you want to wear the badge, it requires loss of something, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. And that's his loss of, I think about my husband, who has literally lost relationship with his own children to be in a relationship with a Black woman, right? That's like that's loss. And he would never say, oh, I'm an ally, but I know what you've lost in order to stand next to me, to honor our family, to raise my Black daughter from another marriage. I know the loss associated with that. And a lot of people aren't willing to think about it that way. But we are, as minorities, we're willing to lose our jobs to stand up for what's right. We're willing to, be in that situation. I think more people of dominant group need to be able to experience loss as a result of this work. They will experience loss.
Yeah, Kuma, I just think it is so refreshing that we not only have the benefit of your professional expertise in this space, but we also have the benefit of your personal experience in this space. And I think there are so many things about you as a person that will not only enlighten us as we do this work, but really help to inform how we approach the work in ways that will really reflect back on who you are and what you bring to Des Moines. So I am just thrilled to be able to work with you. And I'm going to close out with just a couple quick questions. Is there anything about this work that you'll be doing here in Des Moines that scares you or gives you a reason for pause? But at the same time, what are you excited about, and what gives you optimism about this work?
I mean, the idea that, and I don't know that this has been done before, but what gets me excited is equity as standard operating procedure for a community is like, wow. Right? It's just so exciting. And the fact that I might have any part of something like that is just really, really exciting. And nothing scares me about the work. I'm fearless in this space. I'm fearless. But what gives me pause is I know how hard it is. Right. And I carry around my own backpack of insecurities and imposter syndrome and all of the things that, that make up and swirl around in my mind. And what worries me is that people would give it lip service and say the right things, raise their hand. Yeah, we're all going to college, when we know they're not. And I almost would rather know who's with me. Right. Versus trying to suss that out in the process, in terms of when you ask people to step up, show those receipts, and they don't produce. I just think that's disappointing, and it sets the work back, right? I'm trying to amass an army here, right? This is what it's going to take. And the setback is falseness. And it's okay to feel like you're not ready. It's okay to feel like this is hard work and I need help, or I don't really know if this is what I want to do. I almost wish that could be like right up front and everyone could wear it on a badge. Not ready, needs more time. Because I'm looking for those that have got the yes, the yes box checked. And so that's what gives me a little bit of pause. It's like, how do I get to the meat of it? How do I find the warriors and then put them to work on the problem at hand, on the war ahead?
Yeah, yeah. Those people who are willing, ready, and able to authentically engage
Authentically
in this
engage and
important
lead
work.
authentically. That
Yeah,
is what we need. Yeah.
yeah, I love it. I love it. So I'm going to leave the last word with you before we close out. We've covered a lot of territory, and I'm just thrilled not only that you're here with us in Des Moines to really help lead this work, but that you bring your full armor and your willingness to jump into the deep end of the pool
Yes.
with us on this work. So, Kuma, any final thoughts for our community, our listeners, as we close out this afternoon?
Yeah, I usually use a quote by Lila Watson. If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together. But I'm going to not give you that one. But I did, but I'm not. And I'm going to leave you with a message that I left with my own hometown. In January of 2020, I was named the Martin Luther King Keeping the Dream Alive Award winner. And with that title comes the opportunity to address in a big event where you speak to the community, basically on Martin Luther King Day. And the speech, the quote was Martin Luther King says, "I have a dream." Right? I have a dream that one day, little black children, a little black girl, he does this whole thing. And it's just this cadence that he has where he had this dream. And I will say to you what I said to Tulsa, I'm done dreaming. We've been dreaming for 50 years. We've been dreaming forever now. I'm really ready to wake up. And I challenge Des Moines to wake up with me. Let's stop talking about this dream that this man had, and we can all quote him and we all feel confident and good when we say it. It's wonderful, but gosh, the dream is now a nightmare. And I'm so ready to wake up and actually begin the work. And so join me. Let's wake up together.
Oh, Kuma, I love that. I'm ready to wake up with you. I'm beside you in this work. And yes. I am just thrilled on behalf of our community, on behalf of the DSM for Equity Collective, Capital Crossroads, the Directors Council, Conversations in Color, our sponsor today, the ITA Group, which really has invested in this speaker series since its beginning. And then, of course, our community partner, the Greater Des Moines Partnership. On behalf of everyone, Kuma, we are thrilled that you are going to be leading this work in Des Moines. And to our listening audience, check out Kuma Roberts. You'll see her around town. Join her, join us. We've got a lot of work to do, and we're tired of dreaming. Let's wake up and get it done. Let's wake up and get it done. So thanks, everybody. So good to see everyone this afternoon. Kuma, it's a pleasure. To our listening audience, we'll see you again in, let's see, this is October for our next Conversation in Color. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.